Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my regular updates from the Capitol. It's a very busy time. First, I want to address the issue of President Biden's decision not to seek re-election. I think we heard from Joe Biden last night, who I think showed himself as a real American patriot, putting the country first, recognizing his literally multiple decades of service to our nation, but realizing it's time to pass the torch. So I'm grateful for the president's selfless decision. I'm also think about the kind of America that Joe Biden talked about last night, that can accomplish great things, but that we all have to own that responsibility versus the dark and destructive vision that Donald Trump continues to put out. As a matter of fact, I saw in some of the clips that in the last day or so he's called America a stupid country. How do you aspire to lead a nation if you make those kind of comments? I've also been extraordinarily impressed by how much support has been thrown behind Kamala Harris. I know Vice President Harris very well. Lisa and I had spent time with her and Doug socially. She served on my Senate Intelligence Committee. And the next president of the United States is going to inherit an extraordinarily challenging world where we've got Russian aggression in Ukraine, China's efforts to continue to expand its authoritarian power, not only across Asia, but across the world, a NATO that has been strengthened under President Biden. And Vice President Harris has got the ability to have that continuity. She's had exposure to the world's leaders. I think she will be well received. And I can tell you, seeing the kind of questioning that she brought to the Senate Intelligence Committee, both in open hearings, where I think virtually nobody can forget how, even though she was the last questioner, how she questioned extraordinarily then Attorney General Sessions, and so much of her contribution to the investigation into Russian interference in our 2016 election. But I can also tell you, behind closed doors, she was extraordinarily well respected. She did her homework. She goes into this task as running for president, I know, with solid national security bona fides, and I'll be there to vouch for her and proud to endorse her all along the way. I also want to make a quick comment on Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech yesterday. It was impassioned, and while I agree Israel has the right to defend itself, and we all agree that Hamas committed unspeakable atrocities on October 7th, but I was deeply disappointed that the Prime Minister did not acknowledge the suffering and deaths now of over 40,000 Palestinians. And there cannot be a release of hostages without a ceasefire in Gaza. And we see extremism in the West Bank, where Israeli settlers continue to harass Palestinians. We see the Israeli military action in Gaza. We need to get to a ceasefire. And the only way we will get to a permanent, lasting peace is a two-state solution. It's why I joined with other national security leaders, Ben Cardin and Jack Reed, yesterday, and sent another letter to the president reaffirming our support for a two-state solution. So I'm sure there'll be additional questions on that topic. Two other quick comments I want to make, and then take your questions. I know we've got a lot today. One is a piece of bipartisan legislation that I'm reintroducing around the Employer Repayment Act. For years, we have had an ability for employers to pay down additional. If an employee goes back to school, an employer can pay for their tuition up to $5,200 a year, tax-free to the employee. A few years back ago, John Thune and I got a couple-year extension to allow that same kind of tax-free repayment on student debt. We've got legislation that would make that a permanent part of the tax code. As somebody who only got through college myself, as the first in my generation to graduate from college with the help of student loans, I know what a burden that causes on a lot of families, young and old alike, $1.7 trillion still in outstanding student debt. And if the employer can go ahead and pay down that tax-free $5,200 a year for their employees, it's a great retention tool, and it's also one more tool to be used in the freeing up some of the burdens from student debt. And finally, one of the issues we'll be voting on this afternoon, something that I'm a co-sponsor on, kids' online safety. You've heard me year in and year out talk about this. I've got a whole series of bills, but the Kids Online Safety Act will take the first step towards passage this afternoon, trying to make sure that younger kids in particular can get protected from some of the enormous challenges presented by social media. One of the reasons why I think we need some guardrails on AI, if we put guardrails on AI, we may not inherit those same challenges a decade from now the way we did with social media. If we put guardrails in place a decade ago on social media, we might not have the level of mental health challenges that so many of our young people have today. So this is long overdue. It's broadly bipartisan, and we'll take a first step on that a little bit later this afternoon. I know we've got a lot of questions, so I'll turn it over to Laura and be happy to start taking them. Hello? Any questions?
As a reminder, we have quite a few questions on the call, so please, we will get to everyone as soon as they ask the question. Our first question will be to Mitchell Miller, WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to follow up on the last topic you just touched on. I know you've been
Mitchell,
fighting for a lot of legislation related to the Internet. And how significant do you think this would be if you could get this kids online safety bill, the legislation, the package through? And do you think it provides hope for other Internet-related legislation in the future?
Yeah. This will be the first piece of legislation that puts any guardrails on social media. And I believe there's over 70 bipartisan co-sponsors. So it shouldn't be a problem to get out of the Senate, and my hope would be that the House, who talks about this issue as well, will actually take it up and pass it. But this is not at all enough. We've still got to do more. We've got to do more in terms of, I'm supporting legislation that would really prohibit social media for kids under 13, and then have a stricter level of scrutiny from 13 to 18. I think we need to look at some of these algorithms that frankly are addictive and have a little more exposure on those. I've got legislation, bipartisan legislation, that deals with dark patterns, how you get sucked in to some of these websites and you can never escape until you click yes a bunch of times. I've got data portability. I think the Kids Online Safety will be the first act. In many ways, I actually think what has helped provide the runway for Kids Online Safety was the fact that 80% of the House and 80% of the Senate supported the legislation that I started a couple of years back on, forcing the sale of TikTok, which can be used as a propaganda tool by the Communist Party of China. We had to do something to kind of break the invulnerability of big tech, and taking on TikTok, now taking on Kids Online Safety, these are both critically important. But my hope is that they will be steps towards additional legislation and ultimately coming to the big kahuna, what's called Section 230, which basically is a get-out-of-jail-free card for all the social media companies for any of the content on their platforms. It's time to review and revise that. Donald Trump has called for a review of that. Joe Biden has called for a review of that. But it, again, shows the power of some of these big tech companies that we've not been able to get it done. So I'm hopeful that this will be the first of a series of legislation that we will do on social media. And I also hope, while I'm not as optimistic for the next couple of months on AI, we've got to make sure we don't turn a blind eye. There's a lot of positive that can come out of AI, but boy, oh boy, the enormous power, particularly as we get into generative AI, makes even social media pale in comparison.
Senator, our next question is Annie Anderson with Gray TV.
Hey, Senator. Hope you're doing well. So with President Biden making his announcement that he's not going to run again and democracy is his main focus, what do Democrats in the Senate want to see from the president in the final months of his presidency?
Well, listen, the president's got almost an eighth of his presidency left. If you think about 4 years, and he's got about 6 months left. So I think the president needs to continue to be strong on where frankly, his forte is on international affairs. Continue to, stand up against Russian aggression in Ukraine. Continue to rally the world against Iranian aggression, not only in the Middle East, but frankly, as we've seen, Iranian attempts to influence elections and protests and other things in America. China is a threat in a series of technology domains. That international portfolio alone is something that the president has a lot of time left on. I still believe there are additional things he's talking about doing in terms of student debt relief. I've heard he's got a strong reform package on the Supreme Court, and I'm anxious to see that, at least to take a look at it. And we continue to see an economy that is the envy of the world. I think we saw second quarter GDP growth about 2.9% today. The truth of the matter is, and this is plain facts, the whole rest of the world envies the American economy. And world growth has been increased by a full percent of GDP because of the resilience and the strength of the American economy. You've got that strength with inflation coming down and continuing to manage that. I know that's not what Mr. Trump says. Again, I wonder why somebody who calls our country stupid thinks he could lead it, but he paints a very, very bleak picture of where we are in America. That is not the case. I think Joe Biden's got to make sure that the economic growth continues, the implementation of our significant legislation like the CHIPS bill, the infrastructure bill, the IRA, literally 30 cents on all the dollar of all the federal spending has only been spent out. A lot of it's left to be implemented. And again, as I went through at the beginning of the answer, a very dangerous world that needs a solid, steady hand that Joe Biden will provide.
Senator, our next question is Drew Wilder with WRC. Okay, we're going to move on to Bill Atkinson with the Petersburg Progress Index. And we're going to move right along to Mike Gooding with 13 News Now.
Okay, I'm really here. Senator, I wonder if you could just weigh in briefly about the VA-OIG report this week condemning the Hampton VA Medical Center and the removal of the Executive Director, Chief of Staff, and Chief of Surgery.
Yeah, Mike, our veterans deserve better. And it feels like with the Hampton VA, we make progress. It's a little bit 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. This was the 4th OIG report over the director who was removed's tenure, and the 4th, I believe, medical investigation report. I've talked to the regional director and got a briefing. A new team that will be experienced will be brought in. End of the day, this can't be about the personalities. It needs to be about the veterans and the quality of care they get. I do think the quality of care at the VA when you get in the system is pretty darn good. We've still got some shortages on medical personnel. Some of that is not due to the director. Some of that is due to, I believe we need to be able to pay our medical personnel a higher rate so they can stay inside the VA and still be competitive. But I was disappointed with this most recent OIG because I'd hoped and felt that we'd started to turn the corner. But I'm not going to comment on specific management personnel changes. These last 3 or 4 OIG reports have been pretty damning, and we all have to do a better job. And I'll be back down at the Hampton VA shortly in the fall to kind of get my regular update on wait times, on medical personnel, but also to see what else I can do as a senator to make sure that we honor our most solemn commitment, which is keep the promise to our veterans so they get the health care and benefits they've earned.
Senator, we're going to jump back to Bill Atkinson with the Petersburg Progress Index.
Senator Warner, thank you for the opportunity. It's always nice to speak with you, and I apologize for the technical issues at my end earlier. My question is, we have heard from Democratic voting advocates across the country claims of an uptick in the number of new registrations in the wake of the Biden announcement and Vice President Harris's elevation to the top of the ticket. Now, I'm not sure about the rest of Virginia, but here in Petersburg, I'm told by the registrar's office that between 30 and 40 new registrations are coming in daily, mostly through the state election portal, but that has been the case since early June. My question to you is, are you seeing or sensing an excitement recharge in registration? And if so, do you attribute that more to VP Harris's new role or the overall message of the campaign?
Well, Bill, that's a great question. And part of it, I think it's sinking in what the choice in front of America is. We've got a Donald Trump that said he was going to be a new guy that lasted maybe 20 minutes at the Republican convention before he went back into the old, frankly, demeaning of our country. Again, I point out, I think in the last 24 hours, he's called the country stupid and that everybody in leadership in America is stupid. I mean, where does that guy, that's not the America that I know or the America that I think we all respect and love. I do think there's enormous new energy coming from Kamala Harris's candidacy. I think we're seeing that in new registrations all over the country. We're seeing that, obviously, it's been widely reported in the upsurge in donations. I can tell you, amongst my colleagues in the Senate, there's a bigger spring in their step in terms of energy and enthusiasm. And one thing I want to add, Bill, is one of the ways that we could build on that is we still owe Virginia State a visit by the vice president or a debate venue or at least a vice presidential debate. But I'm going to make sure we stay on the campaign and make sure that we either get a visit or a debate still honored at VSU, which also would drive a lot of energy, not only in Petersburg, but in the greater Richmond area and the whole Commonwealth.
Just a reminder to please mute your mics when you're not answering or asking a question. Our next one will be from Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Well, good afternoon, Senator. How are you today? Are you there?
Yeah, Michael, go ahead. Michael,
we can hear you. Okay, while we get that sorted, we're going to move on to Kurt Williams with WTKR.
Hey, Senator, thank you for taking this question. It seems like there's, of course, tremendous focus now on Harris's VP pick, and a number of names are getting a lot of chatter from the governors of Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Kentucky, Mark Kelly from Arizona. Who would you like to see her pick? Come on, you can take a bite on this. And who or what do you think she needs to balance out the ticket, to reach out to groups and areas that would help balance out the ticket?
Do I really look crazy enough to weigh in on one of these folks over the other? I'd like to see somebody that is viewed as a moderate. I'd like to see somebody that's got some foreign policy experience, although I think Kamala Harris is quite strong. I've seen that firsthand in her role on the Senate Intelligence Committee and obviously her 4 years as vice president. I also always take a hanker to governors because they've got executive experience. So hopefully my answer has not disqualified any of the above. And I am sure she'll make a great pick. I think that that's going to bring a new energy to this already energized effort that's been really pretty, I think, pretty remarkable over the last, I guess it was just Sunday that President Biden said he was not going to run for re-election. It feels like a very different campaign today than it did, say, a week ago.
Senator, our next question is Avery Davis with NBC 29.
Hello, Senator. Obviously, you have been very vocal in your support of an immediate ceasefire and release of the hostages. I'm wondering if any of the discussion and question around Kamala Harris's support of Benjamin Netanyahu, whether she does or doesn't, has any effect on your support of her. I know you just said that you believe she has strong foreign policy experience, but is this a concern of yours?
Listen, the vice president, I believe, was meeting with the Israeli prime minister today. I thought that was the case. Don't hold me to that, but I thought there was some indication. And regardless, they have obviously interacted a number of times in her role as vice president. And, I think her comments echo a lot of Americans across political lines. Israel has a right to defend itself against terrorists, and Hamas are terrorists. But the idea, the way the Israeli prime minister yesterday somehow said anyone who protests and calls out the destruction and the number of deaths in Gaza is somehow controlled by a foreign government like Iran. That's just not the case. There is evidence of some Iranian trying to influence. And I was fully reject those protesters who advocate for Hamas or who tore down an American flag at Union Station yesterday. I reject that, and I believe Vice President Harris rejects that as well. But we got to get to a ceasefire. And I have stayed probably as following this as closely as anybody in the Senate, because the CIA Director Bill Burns has really been the administration's lead on this, and he has worked his heart out. And I am, I've been optimistic a whole lot of times over the last 7 months. I've got a streak of optimism again based on some of the things I'm hearing, but we've seen this hope for a ceasefire and those hostages released dashed time and again. And it's going to take both parties, both the Israeli government and the Hamas leadership, to make compromises to get to that hostage deal that will also result in the ceasefire. And remember, one of the things the Israeli Prime Minister pointed out yesterday, which I agree with, is with the Abraham Accords and a number of Arab states in the region who've recognized Israel, and with the potential recognition coming from Saudi Arabia, which is the keeper of the holy sites in Islam, that could be a game changer. But that's not going to take place. That renewed chance for a regional peace is not going to take place unless we get a ceasefire in Gaza. And I wish I would have heard more from the Prime Minister yesterday on that subject.
Senator, we have time for one final question from Kate Capodanno with WCBJ.
Thank you. Hi, Senator.
Hey.
I wanted to focus on the comment about the shift in energy for Kamala Harris, both on the Capitol and, of course, in voter reaction. But, however, when we look at the DNC and the election coming up ever faster, how do you think the party as a whole might need to re-strategize to secure the White House?
Well, I'm not in the inner circle of the Harris campaign team. I think those key Midwestern states are still going to be key: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think a lot of young voters in those states and a lot of voters of color are newly energized. But I also think states that had appeared to be potentially slipping away from President Biden: Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, are going to be back in play because a lot of again, younger voters, Latino voters, I think, are energized. I got to tell you, I feel much, much better about Virginia. And I know my partner of 40 years, Tim Kaine, my friend of 40 years, I guess we've only been partners in government for 25 of those years, or 24 of those years. I think he was going to be fine regardless. But I think Vice President Harris will do great in Virginia. So I'm a lot more optimistic. I also got to say, we've got to go through a Democratic convention. I hope we come out with a different message than some of the fear-mongering that took place in Milwaukee. And I know political pros say, well, how can we do this, make this shift this late? Listen, in most nations, a long campaign for national office is 90 days. I mean, the British do this on a regular basis. Prime Minister Macron just had major French elections in, I believe, about a 30-day time frame. So I think there's going to be more than enough time for Vice President Harris to reintroduce herself to Americans and introduce herself to those who've maybe not focused in the past. And I think one of the strongest things she's got going for is not only an economy that I think more and more people realize is continuing to be strong and the envy of the world, but Donald Trump has gone back to his negative, demeaning, dark vision for America, and I don't think that's where Americans are at. That's not who we are as a people, and so I'm very optimistic, but I've never been a great political prognosticator, and I sure as heck have never been a great political strategist. So in terms of the particular strategies, I'll leave that to the pros. But I very much appreciate everybody. Stay safe, and I'll see you down the road.